Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Community Services Committee for July 25th, 2023. It's 2:30, so I'll call this meeting to order. Item number 2 on the agenda is declaration of interest. If anybody has any interest to declare, please do so when it becomes apparent. Delegations, there's no specific delegations on today's agenda. And item number 4 is reports. The first report we have to receive is PDR CSC 3223. The recommended motion is that we receive the report regarding Grey County's updated housing action plan be received and that the draft housing plan be supported in principle. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that motion? Moved by Scott Mackey, seconded by Andrea Matrosoff. And then I will turn it over to, I believe, Liz Buckton is the one giving the presentation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Lovely to be here with everybody. Can you hear me okay? Volume perspective is good. Okay, wonderful. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a presentation set here. The only thing is I won't necessarily be able to see everybody's faces as I'm talking. So if there is something urgent, feel free. Maybe Sarah or Tara can give me a holler just to bring that to my attention as we go. But here we go. So I think should be good there. All right, so I think at this point in time, you should be able to see the title page of the presentation. I'm not expecting to spend a huge amount of time here. I do hope to leave some opportunity for questions and discussions afterwards. Just briefly, I have put together a brief overview, I guess, of the presentation. So really, I think we'll start off by talking a little bit about the nature of the housing affordability crisis, some of the big picture factors that are affecting supply and affordability, really kind of the big picture challenges, kind of starting at a national scale and working our way down. And then we'll take a look at the local picture, really just to make sure everybody has the context relating to the framing, I guess, of the housing plan. We'll speak a little bit about the relationship of the Housing Action Plan and how that relates to the county's housing and homelessness plan, some of the action plan content, and we can actually bring up the plan and look through that together, and then a little bit about implementation. So I'll start off with a really beautiful wordy slide here, and it's purposefully wordy. I think really the intention here is to share or to illustrate that there are a large number of influences on housing supply and pricing, and a lot of those fall outside of the scope of local municipalities and the county to address specifically. And so I think when looking at the Housing Action Plan, we really tried to take a systems approach, which means that we are looking at various different intervention points, understanding how the pieces relate to each other, and then trying to focus in on what falls within the municipal sphere of control, because that's what's in our wheelhouse. That's what we can affect meaningfully through our work. And I guess what I would say is, although there are a great deal of factors that fall outside of our control, for example, we have very limited input on national monetary policy or the setting of interest rates or that kind of thing. We really have at a staff level tried to kind of activate around those matters that do fall within our scope of control. And I think that is really how the action plan has been positioned, really trying to focus in on how we can learn and educate and push and pull the levers of the housing system locally to kind of tip the outcomes as we would hope they would be greater supply and more affordable to our local residents. And we have been kind of really starting off in trying to do good collaboration and communication. So we've had lots of discussion with the local CAOs and planning staff, and also from a county to county perspective, we are in contact with our counterparts at the surrounding counties as well, really trying to figure out how we can pool our collective understanding and tools and resources to affect some of these factors. Okay, So just briefly about that municipal sphere of control, I think there are certainly actions that we can be looking at in our local communities that pertains to how we establish our local policy framework, obviously directed by some of the legislation and framework of the province. We can be really taking the reins on how we plan and coordinate infrastructure alongside our development so that that's happening concurrent and in a fiscally sustainable way. We can be looking at all of those tools and enforcement mechanisms that are not zoning or policy based, so that, bylaw enforcement, various different types of bylaws that we can be using to affect local impacts. We do have a large degree of control, I guess, over that development review and approvals process. Not so much what it needs to look like, a lot of that's mandated, but we do have the opportunity to figure out how we can best streamline that in our own circumstances and to our own resources. And then we do have some control regarding local fees, charges, the way that we may incentivize different types of development and how we may choose to defer, for example, certain fees or charges. Another wordy one again, and again, the intention is to very much illustrate that the challenge is not only a local one, it is a national one. So we've got all of these factors happening, big picture, and those challenges are playing out nationally as well. So federally, it's been identified that we have a housing gap of about 3.5 million units in order to meet demand and restore affordability in Canada. We've been targeted in the province of Ontario to deliver 1.5 million homes by 2030, which I think is quite an ambitious goal. Certainly, we have been seeing kind of a broad reporting, I guess, in the media around how we are seeing some disconnect between household incomes and the cost of living generally. And I think we've also been seeing a realization that a shift to housing being viewed as an investment as opposed to shelter and meeting a basic need has had some impacts as well. In Canada, recent reporting identifies that the average home purchase pricing is now 7 times the average income for households. And in certain markets, so like Toronto, for example, that's even higher, that ratio between household incomes and average pricing. We're seeing a lot of news about interest rates recently. We have been experiencing some sticky inflation following the pandemic. And I think Bank of Canada has been trying to respond to that to get back to our 2% or below inflation target. And they do that through interest rates. But I think we are in a delicate time in that household debt levels are very high, and mortgage interest, mortgage lending takes up a really large percentage of our household debt. And so it can be, I guess, a risk perhaps, or it's, and then of course, demographic industry retirements from the construction industry in the next 10 years. So we're going to be needing to fill those gaps and grow the industry to meet the demand of creating the level of housing that we're being asked to create. And then add to that those supply chain and raw input challenges. So certain cost inputs over the course of the pandemic have increased 40 or 50% into that construction process. And certainly we're not the only country that's looking at amping up our housing supply. So globally, I think the expectation is that we will see cost escalation and some challenges in obtaining raw inputs to our construction industry. So there's a lot going on. We see the really localized impact of that in our communities and are asked to respond in that way. But I think it's important that we are understanding that it is tied to much broader and very nuanced issues at that national scale. So locally, how is this playing out? I guess is the question. What are we seeing on the ground here? And I will just highlight that we did back in the fall, September of last year, took forward a report to the Affordable Housing Task Force that tried to dive into some of the data around that. And so we certainly can share that link along. I think I have included a link to that report in this staff report. But what we identified there is that there has been relatively low rental vacancy in our area throughout the pandemic. I think a healthy vacancy rate is typically targeted around 3 to 4%, and we've been trending lower than that. We've also seen our social housing wait list double over the course of the pandemic. And so we are in a position now where we've got 1,200 eligible Grey County households on that wait list. So those are kind of some of the metrics. We did take a look last year through that data report as well and did a snapshot view of some of the rental listings that are available in Grey County communities. What we had determined through that was that available rentals are being offered on average of $1,850 a month plus utilities in most cases, and that the larger the unit, the larger the price tag generally. That can be contrasted with the average rental pricing that's reported by CMHC. They identify that an average locally is $1,019 a month. That's what renter households are paying on average. But I think it's important to recognize that that reflects occupied units. So that might be units that were constructed long ago, that were occupied long ago, and have been subject to rent controls in the interim. And so really where that puts us is that for someone looking to obtain an affordable rental or a rental unit in general, what's available on the market locally is really targeted to kind of the 8th and 9th decile of household renter incomes, or upwards of a $74,000 annual income to make that $1,850 a month affordable, or fitting within about 30% of their gross income. And so that means many rentals are out of reach for social benefit recipients, minimum wage or entry level professional employees. And we certainly have been seeing that play out in our communities, definitely in the business community, where we're starting to see large employers taking matters into their own hands and pursuing targeted employee housing opportunities. So we've recently seen a proposal come forward at Blue Mountain for dormitory style employee housing. And there are a number of different applications in various stages of process for personal support worker housing, for example, in conjunction with retirement or long-term care homes. On the ownership side, so we've recently received some data from the province identifying that the average resale price for our regional market area in Grey County is $712,000. That would be affordable to households in the top 10% of the income spectrum, so in high income. And we really have very limited listed supply that's affordable to middle income households, which are traditionally kind of that 4th to 6th decile, or 70 to 103,000 based on current numbers. So for them, an affordable purchase price would be in that range of $240,000 to $360,000. And if you'd like an entertaining way to spend an evening, I really do, please take a look at the MLS and get a sense for what's available. There's quite limited supply in those price range, and that exercise really drives it home.
Quick question, if I may, just while we're on this slide.
Yep.
So the social housing wait list doubled. There's 1,200 eligible families on the wait list. Can you just remind us how many units of social housing we have in Grey County? Do you know? Sorry.
Yeah, so I can ballpark it, and Anne Marie can certainly pipe in to correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is it's around 1,500. I think between our own units and those that are administered with community partners as well.
And with those that we subsidize in various other, we have about 1,900 that we subsidize altogether.
Super, thanks, Anne Marie. Okay, so moving along, so that's kind of the big picture to local picture. How's it playing out? What are we really looking at in terms of the challenge we're trying to get our arms around? And I wanted to make sure that we're providing some distinction, I guess, between this housing action plan and the housing and homelessness plan that is developed and administered through housing services. The housing and homelessness plan is really related to that provincial requirement for county housing. And it focuses on the provision of those subsidized supportive and transitional housing units, really at that deeply affordable end of the spectrum. And that plan also addresses kind of various different strategies for homelessness diversion and moving people through the proper supports to get into stable housing. The housing action plan, on the other hand, really is focusing more around the policies, practices, and identification, as well as pursuit of funding to try and facilitate the creation of more affordable housing in our communities by private developers, as well as nonprofit organizations and others. And so I think the actions within the plan are intended to kind of facilitate that market or just below market or maybe some missing middle housing. But I really think that there would be a substantially greater investment and targeted effort necessary if we are looking at increasing the supply of that deeply affordable housing. And so I think that's probably a further conversation once we get some of the kind of process considerations and actions within this housing action plan delivered. I guess here I wanted to note as well that, I think it's important from an expectation management standpoint, just to say that neither plan includes a silver bullet solution. And I don't think there's much here that would lead us to a place where we're going to have a sudden large scale affordable housing with shovels in the ground. But I do think it's a very worthwhile effort. And I think that the housing action plan in particular, will support and lead to a greater understanding and of the challenge and capacity to address the challenge, as well as helping us to target how we might want to move forward in terms of advocacy messaging to other levels of government around the tools and resources that we may need. Okay, so for the housing action plan itself, we have structured that and this pulls from the preamble of that plan. But the intention is to take a systems view. So housing or affordable housing is an output of this vast system of interrelated parts. We are looking at interventions within our scope of control to pull all of the potential levers that we can. And that might be policy interventions, resourcing interventions, looking at our practices, how we communicate, how we share power, what relationships we hold, and then all of the mental models that kind of underpin the current system in place. And really the objective there is to try and tilt the system through aligning all of our levers to facilitate the outputs that we're hoping for, recognizing we have all of those other big picture things that are at play that have to be factored in as well. And I think the other important thing in looking at a systems view or systems approach is that we do have to be cognizant that human systems, economic systems, these are adaptive and they're very complex. And so an action here can have ripple impacts or unintended consequences. So I just say that because I think it's important that we really do embody this living document approach, that we're making sure that we're checking back in and keeping track of data and ensuring that we're monitoring where we're at in the process so that we can be coming back and updating and adjusting course as needed. And then the other thing I wanted to focus around that, the framing of the action plan, is just that we really have developed this on the basis of a collaborative focus. So you'll note within the actions that are identified in the plan that the intention is really that Grey County would play a leadership role. So we would help in the coordination of delivery of a number of these actions. But the actions themselves are distributed across municipal, charitable, nonprofit, business, and community agencies within their respective spheres of control. And so it's a matter of kind of coordinating around particular actions and putting all of our resources collectively together in a same direction for common outcomes. And so I think that, speaks to the notion that there is like a local municipal role, for example, in addressing the housing crisis. But I think it might not look like how many might envision it. It's a lot of the behind the scenes of facilitatory actions that are required to really bring housing plans through kind of the home stretch of their journey through the approvals process. And I guess, I think it's a we're all in this together kind of situation. And I think the imperative here is that a lack of affordable housing supply will have impacts in our communities, and those will be felt at the very local level. And so by taking a proactive, collaborative approach, the hope is that we can catch some of those impacts on the upstream, as opposed to waiting for them to become bylaw enforcement, encampment management, and shelter provision, which is arguably much more expensive to do in responsive fashion. So I guess I will just flip then along to the action plan items. We've brought forward a number of actions that have been identified through prior reports, prior action plan documents, and really try to consolidate those together. A number of those current actions are well underway or established. And so the actions articulated in the plan are maintaining, enhancing, pursuing further refinement of some of these types of actions. So for example, we will be looking to maintain a levy contribution towards an affordable housing fund. We're currently working through evaluation of a pilot surplus county site, and we'll be preparing some templates and resources associated with that to share back to member municipalities to help guide that evaluation process in your own communities. We'll be looking at our CIPs and many of our communities, the majority of our local municipalities do have CIP programs in place now. So it may be a case of going back and revisiting those to determine how the various housing incentives within those are structured. Perhaps there's an opportunity for refinement there. Making sure that we're funding those plans as well, I think is an important consideration. Maintaining and enhancing development charge deferrals and exemptions for targeted housing types. Now there has been some legislative change around development charges in general. So I think we will have to accommodate that. And so there will be some further discussion here. But I think the idea of aligning our incentives, rebates or deferrals to our targeted areas of need makes a lot of sense. So we'll keep going with that. Certainly county official plan, local official plan, and zoning bylaw updates, again, to streamline processes, to make sure everything is well aligned, to minimize those situations where people are coming in for site-specific amendments unnecessarily that can cause potentially delay. On the housing services side, so there's been actions around creating supportive and transitional housing together with community partners. Really looking at maintaining and enhancing the support services that are offered for those experiencing homelessness and kind of upstream of that, trying to divert from homelessness. And then really working with the nonprofits to create new affordable housing and build local capacity for that affordable housing creation. So those are ones that are underway in some way, shape, or form. And then in terms of new actions, we've included additional residential unit guidebook as one of the outcomes there. I think there's a number of different best practice and resource materials that we could look at exploring and developing for sharing with all of the member municipalities. Single room occupancies might be one of them that we want to take a look at best practice around permissions and regulation. Employee housing could be another one, just in terms of pulling together best practice. So I think that notion of developing resource materials for sharing is one way that we can help at the county level to share capacity and support the lower tiers. I think the other thing is really taking a learning stance around what alternative funding models might be available to support more affordable housing creation in our communities. And so I don't necessarily know that this will be municipalities initiating these tools, but it might be figuring out how we respond and dovetail our supports and programs to other models of financing or other types of tenure models. So cooperatives, for example, might be one example. We're learning so that we can facilitate local learning and being receptive to those ideas when they come forward. We are looking at hosting a housing forum this fall. And I think the intention there would be that we'd be pulling together counselors and key staff to really get on the same page and have a common operating picture of how we can address some of these challenges, what the status of the situation is, how that differs from place to place, and really talk about the coordination of our efforts. We just had our very first affordable housing community practice meeting on Friday. So that is including membership from each of the lower tier municipalities. And we'll be meeting on a regular basis to share resources and to have discussion around issues relating to affordable housing supply and approaches. We're currently in the process of providing some materials back to municipalities around recommendations recommendations for planning process efficiencies. We have seen some changes in the legislation around how our processes work. And so just kind of all getting onto the same page and into a new normal, I guess, in terms of how that process works, and then tweaking it to make sure it's as streamlined as possible. We foresee an advocacy role, so getting together, figuring out what those tools and resources are that we need, and approaching other levels of government for those supports. And then I think there are some other supportive actions included here as well. So data collection, I think, is one of the big underpinning ones to support our efforts, not only for monitoring of where we're at in response to the housing crisis, but I think in terms of grant applications and that kind of thing, there's always a data need required. So we will be working through the community of practice to establish some templates and data collection approaches with the lower tiers. Through economic development and partnership, we can be looking at that construction industry and trying to support and grow that here locally. And then considering that we are also in a housing crisis and a climate crisis, figuring out how we achieve these objectives in a way that's aligned. And so through the climate change action plan, the development of a green standard has been recommended. And I think that is also important to be included with the housing action plan, because really we do want that social, environmental, and economic sustainability to be in place together. So I'll speak really briefly to implementation, and then I think we could open it up for questions. And my thought was we can pull up the housing action plan itself if there are questions around particular items. But I recognize it's a lot of me talking. And so I think probably a good break point there. So just roughly or briefly, sorry, implementation. So like I say, the housing action plan, this is actually its public debut through Community Services Committee. We've certainly had lots of discussion with the CAOs and with planning staff, but this is the first opportunity for a broader look. Following our conversation today, if there are further tweaks or edits or additions that we need to make, do so. But the intention would be that we would take forward the action plan to Committee of the Whole for endorsement. And then through the budget process, we'll be looking at any specific implementation or funding needs for delivery of these action items. And again, like I noted, that we're aiming towards a housing forum in fall. Community practice is up and running. That does include those local reps. And I think we will be targeting that data collection focus later in the year to really try and get a plan in place for 2024 so that we've got all of that information available when those grant opportunities do arise for municipal funding relating to housing. And I think as part of that community practice as well, and I'm just in the process right now of working with our IT department, we will be looking at developing a bit of a inwardly focused resource portal for community practice members. So as we're pulling together resources, as we're pulling together reports and data, monitoring kind of the media and its response to the housing crisis, we'll have a central location to house that information for ease of access and sharing. So I'll just stop sharing my screen now. And I think certainly if there are questions, I'd be happy to address those. And like I say, we can pull up that housing action plan as well to take a look in there if there are specific questions about items.
Thank you very much, Liz. A lot of information there, a few purposely worded slides. Any questions or comments to Liz? Member Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much, Liz, for all your efforts. Certainly, we are in a crisis right now, and I believe with the interest rates and all the mortgage renewals, and I think it's going to get worse. So I'm glad the county is looking at this situation right now. I think the chair asked about the number of subsidized units that the county has, and Anne Marie said 1,900. The gap in Canada is 3.5 million. In Ontario, it's 1.5 million. Do we have any idea what the gap in Grey County is? What our target needs to be to get everybody housed?
So I can attempt to address that. So what I'll reference is the housing assessment resource tools. There's been a data project by the University of British Columbia that has taken census data to try and break it down, households and core housing need, to give us an estimate of what kind of unit count we might be looking at. And so I think the challenge is, and what comes from that data set, is that we're probably in the range of about 2,000 units at quite a deeply affordable price point as being needed. But generally, supply is required in general, because we are dealing with local population growth. And I think being proximate to Toronto, we are probably going to see some spillover as it becomes more expensive, and that's happening much faster, I think, than things are escalating here. And so all of those factors mean that supply in general, I think, is encouraged. But it's those more deeply affordable units, so kind of in that $1,000 or below price point, even 800 and below price point, that I think will be challenging to create. But we know there is the demand for that based on our core housing data. So I have to stop there and pass it along.
CEO Wingrove, I see you have a response. You are still muted.
Let's try that muting again for the
There we
third.
go.
Sorry, Liz, can you pull up that heart graphic? The one that shows the continuum with some numbers on it, because I think that does a really nice job of sort of showing kind of where it all breaks down as far as income levels versus what would be considered affordable. And I think that's an important part of the conversation that you're asking about, Councillor Mackey, is, you know, if we were gonna make investments, where are we likely to get the most bang for our buck, if you will? So can you
Sure.
find it, Liz?
Yes, yep, I had it,
Okay,
actually had
perfect.
it open.
Perfect.
Okay, screen share again. Okay. So I think, Kim, this was the one that you were
Yeah,
indicating here.
this helps.
Okay, so I think the way that we would generally read this, so we've got kind of household income along the top. This is scaled, so the size of the green category, for example, representing high income households, that's relatively sized to the other categories. So, you know, a household income of $15,000 translates into an affordable rent of $390 a month based on that 30% of household income. And then the types of housing that might provide someone housing at that price point is oftentimes that subsidized or supportive housing. Maybe it's through portable rent subsidy. You know, perhaps those folks are in a shelter circumstance. And in terms of our households, we have 1,100 households that are operating off of an income in and around that price point. $40,000 income level, we're looking at an affordable rent of in and around the $800 price point, and that's changed a little bit just because the minimum wage has come up. But again, you know, if we're looking at rental pricing right now, it's actually more kind of in the $1,800 to $2,200 range. That housing is really targeted to folks kind of making the median household income and above. And so, you know, we know that those occupied market rental units are averaging in around that $950 to $1,000 a month based on an average of all of the occupied units. But someone living in one of those units who might want to move into a different unit, or someone outside of the area who might want to move in and to take an employment role, for example, would be really challenged to find something if their household income is between, say, $40,000 and $60,000 a year. So we plotted this out because I think it really does kind of show us how, you know, ownership housing is increasingly, I guess, reserved for those in high income. And so as we're seeing the access to purchasing housing decrease because of interest rates, because of the pricing associated with those units, that too puts pressure on the rental supply, increases the competition has a tendency to increase the pricing associated with that. And because the cost of housing has increased to produce it, the new units that are coming onto the market are at that market rental range. And so, in a balanced market, I think what you would anticipate that as we bring on new supply, there's a trickle down effect that, units become relatively priced to the new one. But when we're in a very short supply situation, you maintain that competition for a limited number of units. So it keeps the prices elevated. And I think it really puts pressure on the community housing because folks are either stuck in the unit that they've got that's affordable or have limited options in terms of where they might go otherwise. Kim, did you want to speak at all further there? If I hit the main parts, but
Yeah, no, I think the other piece of information, and I don't think we have it in an easy chart form, is to take those rental payments, if you will, and convert them into, and what does that, if you were going to buy something, what could you afford to buy with $1,500 a month at current interest rates? What can you afford to buy at $2,250? And it soon becomes very apparent that not very, like, there's everybody just about is priced out of the market, unless you're a 2-income family earning a very decent income.
absolutely. So it's stark, right? When we look at it from that perspective and think about it from a mobility standpoint of, what options do people have to move within the community? And then from that recruitment or business attraction and retention standpoint, how are we bringing people in to fill employment roles in our community that are making minimum wage or even above into kind of entry-level professional wages that may not be able to access market housing.
Thanks very much for that, Liz. That was the graphic really helped in terms of understanding the numbers. Scott, that was your question that spurred that conversation. So just before I go to Andrea, did you have any follow-up to the response?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. That was a great graph, and it just shows the stark reality, I think, that we're in. I look at the number of seniors and with the baby boomers moving ahead, I'd be interested to know the number of seniors we have in Grey County that are on guaranteed income supplement, because I think those seniors receive about $16,000 a year. So, there is just no way they can afford the current rents if they, unless they're in a situation now that is sustainable, they can't begin to look at, if they're retiring or, reach age 65 or whatever the age is where they're no longer employed any longer and have to rely on guaranteed income supplement, which a lot of people that if they've worked all their lives at a minimum wage job, that's likely where they're going to be, because they're not going to get a lot of CPP or other benefits. They're not going to have a defined pension plan.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't have had enough money to put into RSPs. So, the situation is desperate for, the people at, those ends of the spectrum. I just quickly calculated, someone making $20 an hour. So if you had a couple making $20 an hour, their annual income is about 82. That doesn't take you very far up the graph as far as home ownership. And I would submit $20 an hour is probably, it's a lot more than what some people are making, but it's likely an average wage in Grey County. So we got to wrap our heads around it. One last question, and then I'll turn it over to somebody else, Mr. Chair. I saw one of the links in one of the reports talked about tiny homes, and maybe this is for Scott or for Randy. I think it's the Ontario Building Code says that, around 200 square feet. I haven't seen a lot of uptick on those. And is that a way to try and get some housing stock? Because, hopefully 200 square feet we could build, pretty cheaply. I just Googled some of them look really nice. They're cute little spots. And, from a climate action, if they're insulated properly, we've got so many of these 4,000 square foot homes going up and 2 people living in them. So I think we need to back that up. So just wondering, what's going on with tiny homes and how we could promote them. Typical lots now that, are an acre in size could probably accommodate 4 houses instead of 1, but I don't know. I'll quit my rant.
Thanks, Scott. Scott, do you have a response for that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you for the question, Councillor Mackey. So we have included some updated policies in the county official plan on tiny homes, and we've been working with planners and building officials at the local level to sort of examine what's needed to further support them. We are seeing some inquiries there. We're not seeing quite as much interest as maybe certain TV shows or the media might have one believe. They tend to seem to be more popular in warmer climates. We're trying to create a policy environment where it makes it easy for someone to put one in. And one of the things Liz highlighted in the Housing Action Plan is that idea of an additional residential unit guide. And so that's where we're seeing tiny homes maybe being a great solution is, somebody has a property, they want to put a detached second unit on it, and they can bring in, maybe a prefabricated tiny home in that regard. With respect to, someone buying a 1 acre lot or a smaller lot in a settlement area, you still have the cost of the land, which right now is unfortunately very high, and then the cost of the tiny home itself, and even some of the prefabricated ones we've seen, are still out of reach of a lot of incomes in the county. So, we're trying to create the environment whereby it could be favorable to having tiny homes or maybe multiple on a lot, and the province has certainly done a lot there too. But we haven't seen huge interest just yet. Although if we continue to promote things like additional residential units, maybe there's targeted grants and community improvement plans at the local level, maybe we'll start to see more uptick. Yeah, bit of a rambling answer, but happy to share anything further if the committee wishes.
Thanks very much, Scott. I know last year, myself and another council member from Grey Highlands went to the tiny home show there, and I think it was in Ancaster. And it was interesting because the whole premise of the event was to showcase the policy changes that needed to take place. And Grey County was well ahead of a lot of areas in terms of the policy structures and that we are trying to implement and put into place and promote to try to encourage that niche little market. And I think, Scott, you nailed it pretty well, that not the uptake that maybe some people were hoping for, but it's still, by changing the policies, making it as available as possible, we're at least trying to make it so that it is feasible and have limited restrictions for anybody. But moving along, Andrea, you've been patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Chair? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, and to add to what was just said about the tiny homes too, is to continue to encourage a variety of square footage and footprints of all units, not just tiny homes, but let's stop imagining that a single detached house has to be 2,500 square feet and up, and go back to 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet. Apartments that full families can live in and not have to look at it as it's only a stepping stone, but it's actually going to be their home while their children are growing up. There's just so much more we can do there. My question through the chair to staff is, we recently had our South Georgian Bay Mayors Forum, Mayors and CAOs forums, and Councillor McQueen, myself, and Councillor Kentner were there. And we had recently organized a number of individuals to come and tell us about some of the solutions that are aspirational or are proven elsewhere in Ontario, such as the example that comes from the Brampton area about the concierge kind of concept, and that was on a county level. And so we are having a follow-up conversation just last week at our South Georgian Bay Forum about what do we do with this information. And one of the things that I heard back from the other 3 members, which is Collingwood, Clearview, and Wasaga Beach in particular, said we're leaning on our county. We're making sure that these solutions are a partnership with the county and with the municipality. So my question is where are we in terms of what are we doing obviously this can be a short answer, but what are we doing that's similar to our neighboring counties? What are we doing that is different? Where are the gaps? Are we on the same playing field as our neighbors who are in the other half of our South Georgian Bay Forum? Because as we all know, people don't care if they live in one municipality but work in another. Every single one of your lovely municipalities will be a commutable distance for me and vice versa to you. Thank you, Chair.
Fair question, Andrea. I'm not sure which staff would like to respond to that one. Everybody's excited. Randy, you have graciously volunteered to try to answer that one.
I can start and you know, I think there's been a few opportunities where we've been able to share some of the initiatives and the actions that Grey County and our member municipalities have implemented and have shared some of those resources with other counties and other municipalities across the province, and vice versa. And to me, I think it's important that we're learning from one another, what works, what doesn't work. There's, as Liz indicated earlier, there's no one silver bullet. And so it takes a multitude approach, and it takes everyone working together at all levels of government. And I think that's where this updated housing action plan, I think, you know, it was always, you know, intended to be something that obviously we're working together with our member municipalities. And I think this updated plan really spells out, okay, here's what the county's going to be working on. Here's where we need some support and assistance from our member municipalities. And here's maybe where we can do some further advocacy work to make sure that, you know, our provincial and federal partners are working with us as well. So I think through the community of practice too that Liz talked about, we'll be able to share some of those best practices, those opportunities, what's working, what's not working. And you know, we're happy to share those resources with our neighboring counties and learn from them as well. And I know that Liz and myself at times and Scott have taken part in other sessions that, say, the town of Collingwood has put on, and having some discussions with our neighboring municipalities in terms of what they're working on. Huron County is doing some fantastic work. We've been able to learn from them in terms of how they've been able to increase some of their affordable housing supply. So again, like, I think working together outside, like within our region, within outside our region, is the only way we're again able to make some headway when it comes to some of the challenges that Liz described earlier.
Thanks for that, Randy. Liz, you have a follow-up?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I think Randy spoke to some of those, you know, opportunities for cross-pollination between the various places. And so I guess I just wanted to note that we are at a staff to staff level kind of talking about these things on an ongoing basis. But I think we're dealing with similar buckets of issues. So data, for example, is one of the things that we've been talking about, and that's something that's important here in Grey County. The Simcoe is looking at it, Huron is looking at it versus looking at it. How do we collect that? How do we monitor what we're doing? The other thing, so around additional residential units, you know, I know we've looked at Collingwood's program. Simcoe has some financial benefits that they offer through the county, and Collingwood has developed a funding program that fits in underneath that county offering to try and incentivize those units. So, you know, we've been talking with them about their approach as they're working on different initiatives, figuring out new programs. They're reaching out to us to include us, so we're able to kind of sit in on some of those meetings and share our experience, but also learn from theirs. And in terms of other buckets, so it's best practices, right? Additional residential units, short-term accommodations is another one where we've been doing a lot of work collaboratively, trying to figure out how the best approaches. So I don't know. I mean, the approaches I think will look different in each place because we're resourced differently and our capacity is different. But I think we are all dealing with those same kind of buckets of issues, which are really that database, best practices, trying to get our heads around what other models could work, and Huron has done a really excellent example in terms of looking at activating some of their municipal properties and have been successful with some grant applications as well. So, I really think that there is that opportunity to be collaborative and to be building off of. It's always going to look different in terms of implementation in one community versus another. So there's a bit of translation, I think, that has to happen as we have those discussions. But anyways, I think I kind of talked around the question. Maybe we kind of got most of the way there, Andrea, but happy to take another stab at it if there's more detail that you're looking for.
Sounds like as much as us politicians talk to people, staff from all levels of government, as well as all our neighbors, are constantly communicating to try to come up with solutions to present to us. So thank you very much for your hard work. Member DeBreen, you've been very patient as well. Thank you for that. You have, your hand is raised.
All in good time and good order. It's always good to hear from staff. They often will answer my question before I ask it, if I wait long enough. So I did want to ask, just to back up on the additional residential unit guide. When we were at FCM, there was a municipality. I could go back into my notes and find out which municipality it was, but for now, they had a menu of pre-approved additional residential units to fast track and expedite the process of getting, these things approved. They had waived, that 20-year limit on garden suites. I'm guessing that this guide might include some of those things, but I thought I would ask that if we haven't already considered a menu of, say, a dozen pre-approved plans that people could pick from, then it might be something we could consider just to help move things along. But just wanted to throw that out there, and I see Scott might have already thought of that. See, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Barbara. Scott?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your question, Councilor DeBreen. Yeah, that's a great point, and thank you for raising it. And similar to the chair's comments from a minute ago, it's great when we're chatting at the staff level and politicians are chatting at the political level and sharing ideas across the table. So the ARU guide is in process, and council may recall this is something that we kicked off earlier this year with a project from the University of Guelph, planning students in that regard, and that was actually one of the suite of recommendations they recommended was having some of these pre-approved models and guides or pre-approved models that you could use and hopefully permit as of right or with minimal oversight for ARU. So it's certainly something that we're looking into and want to work further with our municipalities, in addition to looking to make sure as many of these units are pre-zoned as possible, so there's no municipal planning process to go through in that regard. So again, thank you for the suggestion, and it's something we can hope to flesh out further in that future guide document.
Thanks for that, Scott. Barb, did you have a follow-up?
Just one follow-up, and to the point, I'm sure that there are a number of builders that do these prefab suites within, and I mean, if we were to partner with some of those developers for that, anyway, just kind of brainstorming and thinking about, a business that's in Dundalk and another business that was looking to come as well. So, I mean, maybe those are opportunities for getting them made quickly to our specifications, to our building code, and on property quickly. So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Scott, very much.
Thank you, Barb. Yeah, there's a few different developers that have like a modular concept where you can purchase your first section of your home, and then as your family grows, you can purchase the next section and modular connections towards them. Just making sure that they meet within the Canadian Building Code standards. Kim, you have your hand raised?
Just a question. In the presentation, Liz mentioned about having a housing forum, and I'm interested to hear from the people around this table about what kind of information would be useful to you to have at a housing forum? What kinds of things do you want to talk about? And we don't need to decide that today, but I think it bears some consideration. When you look at who's doing bold things right now, as far as this, like how the land, who controls the land, and is the land serviced? Because if anything's going to happen fast, it's going to be because the person who owns the property is willing to do something with it quickly, and the servicing is already in place. Without those two things, it's slow. And then the next thing that we know is that what's density? What's the density? What's your zoning allowing? And how many hurdles do people have to walk through in order to, make use of a higher density? And I see Vancouver is considering completely eliminating single family zoning. I don't know, how many discussions there have been around all of your tables about infill and what an infill project looks like as opposed to a secondary unit project, and so on and so forth. Like, who's doing these things? Developers doing these things, or individual property owners? Are we looking to them? And so there's a lot of complexity in this, and you can, I think, understand why things don't happen as quickly as they like, which is why I think the ARU unit guide will be a big help to help the people that are interested in doing this to see their way through some of this. But beyond that, I still think maybe we need to understand more from the development community or from others about what they would be willing to do if the path was clear for them to do it.
It's a fair point, Kim. The Grey Highlands, we're looking at redoing our zoning bylaw for the first time in a significant amount of time, and the changes to the zoning is trying to make more units or infill more feasible. I think 4 units on a residential lot is what we're currently looking at. We're looking for feedback from our community to say, are we wanting to debate that? I think the county recently, through your official plan, changed it to 3 units. And so Grey Highlands planner was just like, well, if we stretch it to 4 and just get feedback and see where we're at as a potential for infill. And it's kind of like you said, the clearer pathway we can open up for development, the less hurdles, perhaps we can encourage some of these things to take place. Maybe not the most financial feasible for different business types, but at least makes it so that it's less headaches, less heartaches in trying to get some of these things built. Warren, I see you have your hand raised, good sir.
Yes, just to follow up on Kim's comments there. I know that in Hanover, it's been like 35 years since we've seen a multi-level apartment building being built. And right now we have, one with shovels in the ground, 2 more that are proposed, and a third 2 that are proposed, and then a 4th one actually that are in the planning stages. So, I think you're right. We need to connect with the developers and see what it is it takes them to be interested in building those kinds of projects, because typically our local developers are more into single family, maybe a couple of semis or something like that. But these are certainly out of the area developers that are coming in, picking up these properties, and the CIP has certainly been a key component of those projects moving forward. So whether that's a trend that everybody will see, but it's certainly it's a welcome addition here in Hanover.
Thanks for that, Warren. Any other questions on this item 4A? So we're just receiving it. It's going to hopefully be moving along to the county process, and we'll have a further conversation with the rest of our colleagues there. Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Moving along to 4B report. There's a few different parts to this one. I'm not going to read this full motion. Everybody has it on their agenda. Can I get a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor? Moved by member Dickert, seconded by member Milne. And I believe it is Anne Marie Shaw who is leading the discussion on this one.
Thank you very much. In May of 2021, council approved a resolution to move forward with divesting some of our identified Grey County properties. In this case, it is Westmount. We had identified this area. The homes are older and not necessarily energy efficient. The idea was to add once the units were sold, then that fund would go into our affordable housing fund and would be used to build various types of housing. So right now we have 2 properties that have been identified for sale.
Marie,
They are
Mr. Chair,
vacant.
I apologize for the interruption. We're just having a quick issue with our meeting live stream. Could I ask you, Anne Marie, to just give us a short pause while we try to restart it? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Anne Marie, for
No worries.
hopefully we didn't miss too much of that great conversation we were having on the first item.
I think it's only been about 2 minutes. I thought that it was still up to speed, but it looks like it did cut out. But everything will be in the recording that I'll post online following the meeting.
Fair enough. So is it safe to continue now then?
Once you see the pop-up that we're live, we should be good to go again.
Perfect.
I'll let you
I
know,
will.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. There we go. Looks like we're live again.
Yes,
Anne-Marie?
you should be good to go. Sorry about that.
Okay, so we have identified 2 properties that are ready for sale. And as part of the administrative process, in order for us to declare land surplus, we do need to bring it to County Council's attention for approval. And then we will be giving proper notice of sale of land. So we're hoping that the sale will proceed in September. And any proceeds would be then put into our affordable housing fund. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just a quick one from myself, Emery. I know at the last Community Services Committee, we are having some discussions around our homeless initiatives and such. And I think these are the 2 properties you had mentioned during that meeting as well, right? Yeah.
That is correct. And there'll be another one that's available in later in the winter. So that is correct.
Always good when my brain's working as well as I thought it was. Any other questions for Emery on this one? Scott, and then Barbara.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you to Anne Marie. When the realtor gives us an appraised value of the property, do we then accept offers within a certain margin of that appraised value, or are we looking at what the value, like if we list it, I'll throw it a number, $500,000. Do you have the wiggle room to accept an offer a little bit below that, or how does that process work?
We use the realtor for the entire process. So it is the realtor that's doing that negotiation. And of course, we've been lucky so far. Any of the units that we have sold have been above what we have asked. So yes, I mean, I think in our policy, it does say that staff has the ability to negotiate the price. And then, of course, we bring that back to council to let them know what it has been sold for in a report.
Thank you for that. Barb, you had a comment as well?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I understand the decision to divest of the older properties, the ones that are, the least efficient. And I'm sure staff have thought of this. Is this the right time to be divesting of housing when we have such a shortage of housing? And my secondary question was, because I'm pretty sure you did think about that, with it being with an entrance into a county property, has any consideration been given to retaining the property, but partnering with or RFPing it with a developer who might be interested in developing it into a multiplex or more units with an affordable slant where we would retain ownership, just or we provide the land lease, that type of scenario. Thank you, Chair.
Sure. Right now, we're hoping to do is add more funds to our affordable housing fund, because if we can sell a few units and then develop more, then that was the whole purpose behind that, is getting that startup funds. So the startup funds are really important, and the funds up front are very important when we're developing, because that's what allows us to make rents affordable enough so that it works. So these funds, if we sell a few of them, then we can use those funds to help support a lot more people. And I mean, in this case, we're also looking at using the funds for to help with some of our transitional housing, homelessness housing. So housing that's very much needed right now, and sort of on that emergency side, right? So that's where these funds will probably end up going. As for other opportunities, we've only just recently had a few come available. We've only sold 4. So this is sort of something that we have thought of. And certainly, I think when we are at a point where we've been able to use the funds for all list of items that we have that we want to do, then certainly if an opportunity came up, that would be great. But according to our housing plan, we do have a number of projects in which we can put this funds that are ready to go. So I think that that's probably best suited to use these funds right now. But certainly that is something we did talk about, especially if it was a unit in which we don't have a shared driveway. These both have shared driveways, but we do have some without that. So that entire unit could be easily sold to another entity for redevelopment.
Thank you so much.
For follow-up to that, Barb. It's a good point, though, and a good question to ask, because while the market might mean we see a financial gain from the sale of these, it's important to make sure all the ideas are considered before we go ahead with that, because once the land is gone, it is no longer ours and probably harder to get back than to keep it. Any other questions for Anne-Marie? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. And we will move along to 4C, a verbal update. And I believe it is Scott Taylor taking the lead on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Nielsen. I can take the lead, and certainly if any other county staff have anything to add, they can certainly add on to the comments. So a number of you might have heard, and I think there was even a link in the agenda to the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is a $4 billion fund being offered across Canada for the purposes of exactly what it says, accelerating the creation of more housing. Anne-Marie and Liz and I met to chat about this to see if it was a good fit for a county application, and dug through some of the materials. There's a lot to read, and there's certainly a lot to learn. After going through it, we also had the ability to chat with a local representative of CMHC and to help understand it better. And long story short, county staff found that it wouldn't be a good fit for the county. And in speaking with the CMHC rep, they were fairly candid that it's more meant for levels of government across Ontario and Canada as a whole that are issuing building permits and zoning bylaws and stuff. So it might be more of a fit for our member municipalities. But in looking through the criteria, it is fairly onerous. There's the need to either have completed or as part of this completing a housing needs assessment, which very few of our municipalities have on their radar. Certainly something that we could potentially assist with, but it's also more geared towards those municipalities that are growing at sort of a moderate to high growth. So I think for some of our member municipalities, it might not be a fit, and for those that are growing a little bit more quickly, even still, it might be a bit of a stretch. So we have shared this with municipal staff, and Liz highlighted at the community of practice meeting last week. We wanted to highlight it here in case there was questions from council or interest around the local table around whether or not there's anything county staff could do to assist a local application. And certainly if there was a municipality that was looking at it further, we can put you in touch with our local CMHC rep, who was very, very helpful and offered to chat directly with any of the municipalities in Gray about what it would take to put in an application. The application deadline is mid-August, so it's approaching very, very quickly. So I would just suggest that if there are municipalities that are interested, it might be a conversation to have here fairly soon. So it's very high level comments. Certainly if there's anything further from any other county staff, love to hear it, or if there's any questions, we'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thanks for that quick update, Scott. Any other comments from staff first? I don't see anybody raising their hands. Was there any questions from members of the committee? Not seeing any there either. Yeah, in terms of the pace at which they're talking, so it's probably more geared towards urban centers than more of our rural municipalities out here in gray, by the sounds of what you were saying, Scott. So I'm thinking only Southgate might be interested, seeing as a significant growth you guys are experiencing at the moment. Brian, comment?
Our, excuse me, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our staff did look into this as well, and onerous is an understatement, and it really didn't fit our municipality either. So yeah, it didn't work.
Fair enough, Warden. Yeah, I guess it's a good idea, but if it's that onerous for our small municipalities, then we'll let the big cities spend their time and energy on it. Seeing no other comments or questions, that will conclude today's things. We have item number 5, correspondence. There's no correspondence. Number 6 is other business. Does anybody have any questions or comments for future meetings? Nope. Moving along, next meeting date is scheduled for September 19th, 2023 at 2:00. That would be it. Looking for one last motion. Barbara and Andrea will move and second that. Motion to adjourn is accepted. Of all those in favor, I should say. I'm sure we're all in favor. Perfect. Have a fantastic afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see you most likely on Thursday.
Take care, all.
Question?
Thank you.
Oh, quick question,
Is
Barb, yes?
Is the next committee meeting, are we going to be doing most of them virtual, or was this an exception?
Through you, Mr. Chair, today's was an exception due to a water shutoff at the county administrative building. So we are actually closed for the day at the administrative building. So the next meeting scheduled and those throughout the year are slated for the bay room at the county admin building.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for that, Sarah.
Thanks.
Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Ciao.
Bye.